Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you joining us today for this next installment of Research Aromatica. Very thankful for the opportunity to be here and for the chance to continue these webinars. I hope you all enjoyed season 1 of Research Aromatica and the variety of speakers and presentations and topics that we were able to cover last year. I personally was excited and learned a great deal in each of those webinars. And we're excited for season 2 now of Research Aromatica. I hope you're able to catch Robin Van Loon in the last week or so and his presentation on the Amazon. If you didn't do that, know that you can join. If you go to the website, researcharomatica.com, you can view that presentation, that webinar, and also any of our previous presentations that we've done through season 1 as we continue through, as I said, to season 2. And I'm really excited for our speaker today. Wanted to welcome Priyanka and give her a brief introduction here. And we're excited to have her present on her fields of expertise in LCMS testing. So by way of introduction, Priyanka Chitranshi is an LCMS Applications Scientist at Shimadzu Scientific Instruments. Priyanka has her degree in pharmacy and a Ph.D. in Bioorganic Chemistry. During her postdoctoral appointment at the National Center for Toxicological Research at the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, she developed an unfortunate addiction towards liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry. Since she has worked on a variety of molecules using LCMS ranging from brominated vegetable oils and soft drinks, analysis of metabolics and antibacterial and antiretroviral drugs, fluorinated water compounds in water, and impurity analysis in pharmaceuticals, just to name a few. She communicates her work through peer-reviewed publications, application notes, and through presentations at national and international conferences. In her spare time, Priyanka enjoys listening to audiobooks and podcasts, and we're excited to have her be a part of this webinar, and it will become a podcast for us as well in just a few little bit of time here. So Priyanka, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure getting to know you a little better as we've gone through this process of preparing for your presentation today. But I'll turn the time over to you and look forward to the question and answer. As please encourage comments, ask questions, and we'll answer those questions at the conclusion of the presentation today. But Priyanka, please take it away and look forward to it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in. Thank you, Aaron, for the kind introduction. My name is Priyanka Chitranshi, and I'm an LCMS Applications Scientist at Shimadzu Scientific Instruments, one of the leading manufacturers of LCMS instruments worldwide. The topic of my presentation is everything you always wanted to know about LCMS applications in essential oils, but were too afraid to ask. All right, so let's get started. Here's the overview of my presentation. As I indicated in my topic, I'll be talking a little bit about LCMS, the technique in itself. I will also talk about the various operating modes and applications that you find for LCMS instruments. And then I will talk about 3 example applications in essential oils. One, I'll be talking about how you can utilize LCMS to characterize raw materials in essential oils. I'll give you an example of Boswellic acid. Second, I will talk about adulteration, one of the very common practices in essential oils, unfortunately, and how you can use LCMS for identification and quantification of adulterants. In this case, I will be talking the example of coconut oil as an adulterant. And the third example application I'm going to talk about is how you can identify and quantify pesticides in essential oils. So let's get started. Before I begin, I just want to point out that I'll be referring to Liquid Chromatography Mass Spectrometry as LCMS during the rest of my presentation. So my understanding is a lot of you are probably very familiar with gas chromatography. It is very commonly used for analysis of essential oils. So gas chromatography and liquid chromatography mass spectrometry are conceptually similar. because they're both chromatographic techniques. But there are some basic differences between the two techniques. So gas chromatography basically separates volatile compounds. And in this case, the mobile phase is an inert gas. The stationary phase is either a packed column or a coated liquid. And the retention in case of GC is based on the polarity, volatility, and the interaction of the analytes with the stationary phase. LCMS, on the other hand, is a soft ionization technique. In this case, the LC eluent vaporizes and ionizes to form gaseous ions. These ions are then introduced into the mass spectrometer. You have a variety of stationary phases and mobile phases that are LCMS compatible and that can be used for development of your particular application that you're trying to look into. And once a sample is dissolved in a LCMS compatible mobile phase or solvent, LCMS can even analyze the least volatile and thermally unstable compounds, and there are plenty of examples for that. You see this, can everybody see my pointer? I'm not sure. So on the left-hand side, you see a graph here where you can see how you can analyze molecules ranging from different polarity, from nonpolar to ionic, as well as range of molecular masses with LCMS, depending on what kind of ionization technique you select. While GCMS is limited to smaller molecules and more nonpolar molecules. All right, so let's learn a little bit more about LCMS. So before we talk about LCMS, it's important to understand what LC is in itself. In the simplest of terms, liquid chromatography is basically where you separate various components of samples depending on their affinity or retention strength for the stationary and the mobile phase. And that helps in the separation of all the components of the sample. They're finally eluted and they enter into the detector where you detect the different components, right? Now, there are different kinds of detectors that you can put together or you can have coupled with the LC in itself. So they range from different differences in their sensitivity. You have the refractive index detector, you have the evaporative light scattering detector, conductivity detector, UV vis detector, fluorescence detector, a mass spectrometer, which is also a kind of a detector. And of all these different kinds of detectors that I have listed, mass spectrometer is the most sensitive. So when you combine liquid chromatography with mass spectrometry, you basically end up with a very advanced chromatographic technique, which can be used for not only the separation, but also identification, quantitation of complex mixtures in very challenging matrices. The spectra that you obtain from an LCMS instrument provides molecular mass and structural information for eluted compounds with unprecedented sensitivity, speed, and robustness. So when you go in the market to buy an LCMS instrument, there are a number of different types of LCMS instruments. There's a LCMS single quadrupole instrument, there's an LCMS triple quadrupole instrument, there's a quadrupole time of flight instrument, and they all have their own benefits. The most common that you will see is the LCMS triple quadrupole instrument. And this is a typical design that you would see of a triple quadrupole instrument. You have the liquid chromatograph or HPLC, from which you introduce your ions to the ion source, which goes through the ion guide, which consists of lenses. Then you have the mass analyzer 1 or quadrupole 1Q1, followed by a collision cell, and then followed by a Q3 or a mass analyzer 2, and followed by a detector. The collision cell, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it because it's very essential part of the triple quadrupole instrument. The collision cell consists of an inert gas such as argon, for example, and this is where the collision-induced dissociation occurs. So what happens is that you select a precursor ion, and when it goes through the collision cell, it collides with the inert gas, and it leads to fragments. And there are different fragments formed depending on how much energy you're putting into your collision cell. So in this figure, you will also see an example of one of the molecules, for example, oseltamivir. And if you look into these different graphical graphs over here, you will see that at collision energy 0, you only see your precursor ions. But as you go on increasing the number of volts in your CID, you start seeing different fragments. These fragmentation patterns are very crucial in identifying what molecule it is, because it's very specific to a molecule. So you can use the collision cell in different ways, and that leads to different kinds of scan modes that are present for LCMS unit. So you can do a product ion scan, you can do a neutral loss scan, you can do a precursor ion scan, or you can do a multiple reaction monitoring scan. So in case of, for example, product ion scan, you have the Q1 fixed at a selected M/Z, while your Q3 is operating in scan mode. So your Q3 is looking at all the ions, while you're just selected one M/Z unit in the Q1. In the case of neutral loss scan, you have Q1 and Q3 operate in scan mode, while you keep a specific MZ difference, and that's what you're looking at. In case of precursor ion scan, you have Q1 in the scan mode, while Q3 selects product ion of a particular M/Z, which is formed in the collision cell. Now, multiple reaction monitoring, or MRM mode, is one of the very important modes, and it's very frequently used for scanning. And in this case, you're looking at the transition of a selected precursor ion to a selected product ion, and you have both Q1 and Q3 fixed at a specific M/Z. And you can, in fact, scan a number of precursors at the same time. With our instrument, you can scan up to thousands of precursors at the same time. So having said that, LCMS actually finds applications in a number of different market segments. You have chemicals, forensics, pharmaceuticals, clinical applications, environmental applications, and food and consumer products, and dietary supplements, to name a few. Essential oils, in fact, fall in the category of food and consumer products and dietary supplements. All right, now that you're an expert at LCMS, I will now talk about how you can use LCMS in essential oils. So like I said in the beginning of my presentation, I selected 3 different kinds of applications that can be done with essential oils. For example, first I will talk about the analysis of raw materials using LCMS, and then I'll talk about adulteration, and then I'll talk about pesticide analysis. So let's start with how you can use LCMS for characterization of raw materials. So in this case, we were provided with an authentic sample of beta boswellic acid, and we were supposed to compare it with a commercial grade sample. And the question was, can we tell the differences between an authentic sample and a commercial sample? So a little bit background about beta boswellic acid. It is a pentacyclic terpenoid, which is produced by plants of the genus Boswellia. It finds various pharmacological uses. It's used for chronic diseases such as diabetes, asthma, cancer, Alzheimer's, to name a few. So it's obvious that it finds commercial applications. All right, so this was the experimental setup for comparing the raw material of the boswellic acid and the commercial sample of the boswellic acid. So, like I said at one point in my presentation, that mass spec is one of very sensitive detectors. So the first thing you have to do before you analyze any sample is you have to make sure you dilute it enough so you're not saturating your detector. So we diluted the samples enough, and then we were using multiple reaction monitoring mode to monitor these 4 components of boswellic acid. We were monitoring beta boswellic acid, alpha boswellic acid, 3-O-acetyl 11-keto beta boswellic acid, and 11-keto beta boswellic acid. All right, and these were our typical LCMS conditions that we used. We used a phenylhexyl LC column, and the mobile phase A and B were 0.1% formic acid in water and acetonitrile, respectively. You can also see that the injection volume to the instrument was only 1 microliter. So you're saving your precious sample as well with this instrument. Now, the different components, compounds that we were monitoring are listed in the table at the bottom, and you can see that we were monitoring in both polarities, positive and negative polarity. And you can see that we were monitoring the precursor ions, and which is going to 2 different product ions. So you can use more than 1 product ion to monitor a specific compound. And in fact, you can use both positive and negative polarity for the same compound if that's one of the if you see good signal in both positive and negative polarities. So that's what we did for 11-keto beta boswellic acid. All right, so here is the comparison of LCMS chromatogram of the 2 boswellic acid sample. You can see the commercial sample on the left-hand side and the ex-Carteri sample on the right-hand side. You see a number of different peaks. They represent different MRM transitions that we were monitoring. On the bottom left-hand side of the slide, you will see a calibration curve that we obtained for beta boswellic acid. You can see excellent linearity observed in 4.9 to 313 nanogram per mil range, and with 1 microliter injection. And on the bottom right-hand side of the slide, you will see the MRM transition that we were monitoring for beta boswellic acid, which was going from 455 to 377. These are the individual components observed in the commercial samples. You can see the various transition for beta boswellic acid, 3-O-acetyl 11-keto, and 3-O-acetyl 11-keto beta boswellic acid. For all of these were observed in the commercial sample. What might strike you as interesting would be that you're observing multiple peaks in the MRM transition. And that is because if the structures are similar, they sometimes share similar fragments. But if you can separate them chromatographically and you have authentic standard, then you can easily compare and unambiguously characterize these components and figure out which one is the true component and belongs to the authentic standard sample. So in conclusion, we were able to separate and quantify the analogs of boswellic acid using LCMS 8050 instrument, which is a triple quadrupole instrument from Shimadzu. And we used MRM channels, which offered a very good sensitivity and specificity, which is needed for characterization of raw material for their authenticity. We were able to distinguish between and compare two samples based on the MRM profile. And in this case, I'm only demonstrating two samples, but you can compare as many samples as you want, as long as you know what you're looking for. And once you have the MRM transitions established. The method I just showed you is a short 6-minute method, which can be easily deployed to a QC lab. And the quantitation of beta Boswellic acid can be easily achieved in nanogram per mil concentrations with simply 1 microliter injection. All right, moving on to the second application that I promised I will talk about, which is the identification and quantitation of known adulterants. In this case, we wanted to first identify unique markers of bergamot, coconut, and lemongrass oils. And the second thing what we wanted to do was, assuming that coconut oil is used for adulteration of bergamot and lemongrass oil in various ratios, can we quantify it? So a little bit about adulteration. So approximately 80% of essential oils that are commercially available have undergone some kind of adulteration, and it's usually done to make the price competitive and maximize the profit. But because of limited availability, bergamot oil is commonly diluted with coconut oil, carrier oils like coconut oil, and that's why we were looking into coconut oil in this case. And typically, you use GC for detection of adulteration in essential oils, but I will demonstrate to you how you can also use LCMS for detection of adulteration in essential oils. All right, so these are some experimental details. Again, we went ahead and diluted all the three oils about 100-fold with acetonitrile. Acetonitrile is an LCMS-compatible mobile phase. And so that works out in our favor because oils like acetonitrile as well for dilution. We used Q3 scans to monitor, look for unique marker for each essential oil. And then after we found the markers, we went ahead and did the MRM optimization for each marker using flow injection analysis. And then after we had the unique chemical marker for each of the oils, we went ahead and prepared different ratios, 90-10, 70-30, 30-70, and 10-90 with coconut oil for bergamot and lemongrass oil. And the goal was, can we figure out with good accuracy this different adulteration compositions with coconut oil. The LC conditions that were used are listed in the table below. We used a flow rate of 0.3 mils per minute. The mobile phases were methanol water with 0.1% acetic acid, and then 50-50 acetonitrile acetone for B. And the injection volume was again 1 microliter. The mass spec we used for this analysis was again an LCMS 8050 instrument from Shimadzu. So here is how we find the chemical markers. So first thing we did is that we obtained a total ion chromatogram using Q3 scan for bergamot, lemongrass, and coconut oil. And full scan is where we do not use collision gas. And you're scanning for a range of MOZ for the entire chromatographic run. And then we went ahead and recorded the Q3 scan. So you see multiple different peaks in your total ion chromatogram. So once you obtain that, what you do is you go ahead and you find the chemical markers for each of these individual peaks. You can use one or more peaks depending on how your chromatogram looks like and how the peaks are eluting. So for example, on the left-hand side, you will see the lemongrass oil positive and negative Q3 scans. And we went ahead and selected the retention time of 1 minute and looked at the MS spectrum that you observe under the peak at 1 minute. And then we selected the M/Z 134 as a precursor and looked for the MS spectrum for the peak at 134. Similarly, we picked another peak at 2.89 minutes and then obtained an MS spectrum for the peak at 287. Again, we did the same thing, we repeated the same thing for bergamot and coconut oil. In case of bergamot oil, we obtained the MS spectrum at 0.88 minutes and went ahead and obtained an MS spectrum, the fragmentation spectrum, for the precursor ion at 359. And then again, we picked another peak at 2.24 minutes and obtained the MS spectrum for M/Z 329. Once you have obtained your MS spectrum, you can go ahead and optimize your MRM transition for the analysis. So you can see that the MRM transition 1 and 2 that we picked for bergamot oil, lemongrass oil, and coconut oil. So this is a very important part of the experiment where you have to be cautious about the chemical marker that you're selecting for each oil, because it should be something unique to that oil and should not be an interfering peak. If it is an interfering peak, then you might want to go back and select another chemical marker using the same process. All right, so we found that the MRM transition we finally selected for these oils was very good in providing excellent quantitative accuracy in determining the composition of coconut oil with bergamot oil. If you look at the green box, you will see that when there was no coconut oil present, so it's just the bergamot oil, we were able to quantify with 108.5% accuracy. And we could not see any transition, any peak for coconut oil in the bergamot oil. However, when we go ahead and make different dilutions in different ratios of bergamot with coconut oil, we are able to obtain different percent accuracy. We are able to, again, correctly quantify the amount of coconut oil in bergamot oil, and the overall accuracy ranged from 80 to 120% for quantification. Similar process used for lemongrass oil. The transition we selected for lemongrass oil was specific for lemongrass oil, and we did not observe any peak for coconut oil when only lemongrass oil was there, which you can see in the green box. But when you look at the red box, you will see that when there are different compositions of lemongrass oil and coconut oil, the method was correctly able to identify the composition, and the overall accuracies ranged from 80 to 120%. In fact, the inverse is also true, which means you can also look for just the transition for coconut oil specific to coconut oil and do the same process of preparing the ratios and look for if there is any trace of coconut oil when you mix it with bergamot and lemongrass oil. And again, the accuracies were pretty high. You can calculate within 80 to 120% range of different composition of coconut oil in bergamot or lemongrass oil. So in conclusion, I hope I've demonstrated to you really quick that we can use mass spec LCMS 8050 for screening and quantitation of potential adulterants in essential oil. In this case, I demonstrated to you the example of coconut oil. And in fact, unique MRM transition can be readily detected in oil samples. In fact, if you're working with a large number of oil samples, or if there are certain adulterants that you're pretty sure that you always see in your oil samples, you can build a comprehensive library and you can do a library search. You can build a database and you can do a database search and quickly identify your adulteration, the adulteration that is coming from, and also quantify it with higher accuracy and reliability. There were a number of other potential markers that we also found in coconut oil, which were very unique to it. As you can see in the chromatogram on the left-hand side, we did not go ahead and talk about that, but you do have other transitions as well that you can look for, in this case, coconut oil. All right, so moving on to the third application I wanted to talk to you about, which is pesticides in essential oils. So we all know that organic is the buzzword these days. Everybody wants organic food, organic essential oils, but how do we know it is really organic? So USDA defines a produce to be called organic if it is grown in soil that has no prohibited substances such as fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, and pesticides. But unfortunately, we always find pesticides even in the products that are labeled as organic. And this applies to essential oils as well, unfortunately. So in this case, we were determining pesticides in jasmine and chamomile oil. So this is how our experimental design looked like. We have 4 sets of samples that were prepared. We have the blank solvent, we have the unspiked matrix blank, and then we had 2 spiked matrix samples at 10 ppb, parts per billion, and 50 parts per billion. We were monitoring 646 different pesticides with 1,949 transitions using a 5 millisecond polarity switching. And in this case, we did a standard addition method for the quantification of pesticide in the matrix. And the reason we did that is to avoid any matrix-related interferences that may occur for quantification. The LC conditions and LCMS conditions are listed in the tables on the right-hand side. They're very typical. You have flow rate of 0.4 mils per minute. The solvent that we used was methanol for the preparation of samples. The injection volume was 1 microliter. And in this case, we were using LCMS 8060 instrument for the quantification of pesticide. So here's the chromatogram for 10 parts per billion pesticide mix spike and 50 ppb pesticide spike. And I completely understand it looks very busy. And the reason is you're monitoring 646 different compounds at the same time. So this is a lot of peaks. However, our software is able to distinguish each individual pesticide or compound that you're looking for. And so it will not be a crazy mess you will be dealing with when you're looking at the chromatogram. And I know this slide looks very busy. This is a list of 646 pesticides. I know it's hard to read, and I don't think you're trying to read, but these are the compounds that were monitored in this method. All right, so here's where I was telling you that you can, even though there are 646 peaks in there, and it is difficult to see all of them at the same time. However, with the software, you can easily view individual compounds and individual chromatograms and do the quantification efficiently. So these are the pesticides that were found below the detection limit in jasmine oil. And the top row is you're monitoring one compound, and the second row is for another compound, and the third row is for another compound. So the top row is unspiked jasmine oil for this particular compound 1, compound 2, compound 3, and you have the spiked at 10 ppb and then the 50 ppb spike. And you do not see much major differences in the chromatograms here. However, if it is present in the oil, you will already see a peak in the unspiked sample, and then when you spike, it will increase, and you can quantitate accordingly using the standard addition method for each of the compounds. So this is an example of some of the pesticides that we found in jasmine and chamomile oil. This is the area of the high QC sample for these 4 pesticides. And this is the areas for low QC sample. This is the area for unspiked oil. And finally, we were able to quantify in the 12 to 36 parts per billion range for different pesticides that were found to be present. Similarly, for chamomile oil as well, we could quantitate as low as 1.42 parts per billion for azoxystrobin versus 6.69 parts per billion for, this will be hard to say, imidacloprid. So in conclusion, in this case, I have shown you how 646 different pesticides were monitored using the Shimadzu LCMS 8060 triple quadrupole mass spectrometer. We spiked about 200 pesticides at 10 and 50 ppb concentration, and we used the standard addition method for quantitation. And the LCMS instrument is in fact a very powerful tool for detection of pesticides at parts per billion range. So in summary, overall, I hope I have demonstrated to you that LCMS is a very versatile technique that can be used for a variety of applications in essential oils. In this case, I only demonstrated to you 3 different applications, but you can do more than that, depending on what application you have, what need you have, what sensitivity and selectivity you desire. These are some of the example application notes that we have. And for example, you can monitor pesticides. You can also monitor triglycerides in oils, fatty acids in oils, to name a few. And finally, I would like to thank APRC, Aaron, and Dr. Prabodh Satyal for inviting me to this webinar and to give me the opportunity to present at this webinar, and also for providing Shimadzu with the samples for these essential oils so we could work on these applications. And it's a great collaboration, and we welcome their involvement in this project. And I would like to thank all the great Shimadzu scientists who have worked on these applications and application notes. And feel free to ask questions now or later, and reach out to me at my email that is provided in this slide. And this will be the end of my presentation. I look forward to answering some questions now.
Great. Thank you so much, Priyanka. Really appreciate the preparation that you've put into this, and for the outline and the education that we wanted to present here. Yeah, so I do have a few questions, and there are a few points of clarification too, but I really appreciate how you broke it down into really first looking at heavier compounds that maybe that are present in some resins, things like Boswellic acids that would be present in the resins of the Boswellia species, the different types of frankincense. And yes, those compounds, because they are heavier, those triterpenic acids do not appear in the essential oil itself, but that could also be an identifier to say, is this an essential oil or an extract of the different resins that may be looking at? And so LCMS would be a tool to be able to identify those triterpenic, those Boswellic acids, and be able to say, hey, this this has it's clearly an extract, not a traditional essential oil. But also, to your point too, you'll be able to see if they were synthetically produced or not, or if they are from natural origins, such as those from Carteri or Freriana or other species of the Boswellia. So I think that that point was well taken there. One question that I did have is you look at the preparation for the samples. You'd mentioned doing dilutions so that your detector isn't saturated. You do a very small amount of the product there. Are there other considerations as far as sample prep that you may need to take into consideration, whether it's the matrices of the sample? But can you talk about sample preparation a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. So sample prep is one of the key things in LCMS analysis, or GCMS analysis, I believe, too. It truly depends on the matrix. If the matrix is very complex, you would want to do further extraction, cleaning of your matrix. Now, you can sometimes get away with simple dilute and shoot. That's what we did in the examples I presented to you. So it will definitely depend on what you're looking for. And if your matrix is interfering with your signal, sometimes we observe, for example, matrix-related signal suppression. And so in that case, you want to clean up your sample further using solid phase extraction or liquid-liquid extraction or dilute and shoot. So those are the techniques that are available. Filtration, for example. So again, it will really depend on what sample it is and how much cleanup is required.
Sure. And as you go, if it's a new sample, something you're unfamiliar with, as you go and perhaps you do start with a dilute and shoot, as you say,
yes.
What would be the best way to tell next steps? If you're getting a lot of noise, if there's clearly some unclarity that's happening within the finished result, how do you know what steps to take as far as filtration or to help clear up the end result? Yeah.
So let's say you're looking at a sample that's very dirty. Let's say you have a soil sample. I'm going to get away a little bit from the essential oil, but let's say it's a soil sample and it's dirty. So first thing, you definitely don't want to inject particulate matter in your LC.
Sure.
So you're definitely going to filter it using a syringe filter, a 0.45 micron filter, for example, if you're using an HPLC setup. And then you will go ahead and dilute it and shoot it in your mass spec and see if you see anything. If you don't, then either there's some matrix-related signal suppression, and then you need to work on the matrix a little bit more to clean it up and see what's going on. Again, I would point out that if you have, if you know what you're looking for, and if you have an authentic standard for it, so if you have certain compounds that you're looking for, I would first use the standard to get my MRM method optimized. And when I have the method optimized, fortunately, most of the time you observe less matrix-related signal suppression when you're looking into the MRM technique. And so even though they're matrix interfering compounds, but they will not produce the same transition going from precursor to product. So there will be less interference with your MRM method. You will definitely see a lot more with the total line chromatogram. But when you're looking at the MRM, you get the specificity and sensitivity you need for your method. So sometimes MRM is just sufficient to take care of any interferences that you will observe, but sometimes you have to go the extra mile and do a sample cleanup.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Another question that I had was more around the type of adulteration that you could see, whether it's an essential oil or an absolute, or really the versatility of LCMS. Again, the matrix of the product can still, it doesn't really matter when you're using LCMS. You can still test it using LCMS. But do you feel if there are, let's say there are terpenes that have been added to a compound, something synthetic in nature, would LCMS still be, in your opinion, an applicable means of detecting that adulteration versus heavier compounds like the medium chain triglycerides of coconut oil? That in one of your examples there, would the lighter compounds still be just as able to identify versus those heaviers?
Yes, yes. Actually, you do see applications for terpenes in the with LCMS. Of course, I talked about triglycerides, and the trick is if you can dissolve it, if you can put it in a solvent, you can make it fly. So if it flies in the mass spec, you can see it. I'm going to stray a little bit here. For example, these days we are thinking about looking into phenols, which are really small compounds in water, for example. And we are able to dissolve it in water, so we can easily look into the MRM transitions of those phenols and identify using LCMS. So, but if it is something very volatile, let's say acetone, it might be a challenge. But a lot of compounds that are low molecular weight can easily be used with LCMS. And I will point out there are different ionization techniques that come with LCMS. It's not just electrospray ionization. I did not touch upon it. But there's also atmospheric pressure chemical ionization, or APCI, that can be used for small molecules and can be very efficiently used. So we could play around with different ionization techniques as well and get good sensitivity and detection.
Excellent. Thank you. And then, so how much have you personally been involved with research on pesticides? Obviously, that's a growing concern. Just as you said, organic is the buzzword, and you see many products that will state on organic certification. How much extensive work has been done trying to identify the vast variety of global pesticides used, and what are you finding as far as being able to accurately identify again, hundreds, perhaps thousands, different types of pesticides being used throughout the world today?
So we at Shimadzu, we have the whole California and Oregon pesticide list that we are working through, and we have methods, we have applications for like one-step method. Basically, it's a whole method package. All you need to do is just run the method, the MRM. We already have optimized the MRM methods for you, and all you need to do is you inject in the mass spec, and you get and most of them are LCMS compatible, except I believe there are a couple that are GCMS. We haven't been able to work with them, like optimize them yet with LCMS, but 99% of the compounds can be analyzed with LCMS. And the different states have their own pesticide list that they have for organic, for labeling as organic. And Shimadzu has methods for them to basically run the method package and identify and quantify those compounds at parts per billion and parts per trillion range.
Excellent. Yeah, and that level of sensitivity is another point too, where some of them, the requirements could be in ppb to be able to identify them, and so you need the sensitivity to be able to ensure you're meeting some requirements, different global requirements for pesticide levels there. Yeah,
right.
Good. I did want to point out too, and so the samples that we'd sent you, there was an essential oil of the chamomile, but then it was an absolute of jasmine that was sent. And so as far as the preparation or the techniques used in the pesticide testing, again, that's it didn't really have an impact on the way you would approach how to prep and run the samples there. But we did want to use, because that jasmine is an extract, it is naturally more akin to pulling off those pesticides that may be on the flower that will be used within the fields or things of that nature too. So again, I see that as having versatility with being able to utilize the LCMS regardless of technicalities, whether it's technically an essential oil and then very high terpenes, or an extract that may have other heavier compounds in them as well. So yeah. So thank you. Of course. I really appreciate your time today, Priyanka. This has been a great experience. Thank you again, and thanks to everyone for your participation. And we'll be sending out more information on our next webinar, and look forward to seeing you on that as well. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out if you have any lingering questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much,
Thank
Priyanka.
you.